You may be familiar with the OBSBOT Tiny 2, but let us introduce you to the brand new Tiny 2 Lite. Hey, I'm Olive, your host here at Versus, and I want to thank OBSBOT for sponsoring this video. Nevertheless, all opinions are our own, and as always, we will provide you with an honest and factual review. Let's start by looking at the most important factor, video quality, because let's be honest, that's the main thing you're interested about when choosing which webcam to go for. Both the Tiny 2 and the Tiny 2 Lite can shoot up to 4K 30fps and 1080p 60fps. For this test, we had both of them set to 4K 30fps with HDR on. Both are close in sensor and aperture sizes, with the Tiny 2 having a 1/1.5 inch CMOS sensor and an aperture of f1.9, while the Tiny 2 Lite has half an inch CMOS sensor with an aperture of f1.8. So technically they should appear very similar. However, as you can see, the Tiny 2 Lite seems to have higher exposure than the Tiny 2. The colors are also more vibrant on the Tiny 2 Lite, but interestingly enough, when the subject isn't a human being, the differences aren't as obvious. Perhaps the colors are slightly more saturated on the Tiny 2, but it's too minimal to make a real impact. When testing out low light conditions, the Tiny 2 Lite remains the more exposed one, and it's actually looking pretty good. Most likely, you won't find yourself in such dim conditions, but in the case that you ever do, the Tiny 2 Lite definitely has your back. Of course, we have some noise present on both devices, but this is expected when in low light conditions. Interestingly enough, the Tiny 2 has a dual native ISO, so technically it should have the brighter video, but this doesn't seem to be the case. When filming a non-human subject, the devices performed pretty similarly, with the Tiny 2 Lite having a little more noise present, specifically noticeable on the blue background. Moving on to audio quality, because unless you're using an external microphone, you'll want to know what comes directly out of these devices. So here is what the built-in audio sounds like from both webcams. Here we have the Tiny 2. What do you guys think? How does it sound? Let's move on now to the Tiny 2 Lite. Are there any major differences? What do we think? Let's talk about it. I'll be honest, I don't hear a major difference in the sound quality. Perhaps the Tiny 2 is ever so slightly clearer, with the Tiny 2 Lite having moments where it sounds a little muffled, but considering the price difference, I'd say this can be disregarded. Both devices have multiple autofocus options, so let's take a closer look at their capabilities. We started off with regular autofocus, which aims to mainly focus on the face of the subject. You can definitely notice that the Tiny 2 struggles to pick up the phone and focus on it. It remains blurry most of the time, or catches focus for a split second. The Tiny 2 Lite, on the other hand, is very smooth and switches up the focus easily each time. Moving on to global autofocus, which aims to focus on the entire scene as a whole. The Tiny 2 seems to have slight improvement when on the setting, but it's still not as smooth as the Tiny 2 Lite, which once again switches back and forth very fast while remaining smooth. This is most likely due to the fact that it's equipped with phase detection autofocus, which enables faster and more accurate autofocus than conventional autofocus. It's nice to see that OBSBOT have integrated this into the Tiny 2 Lite, although it comes at a cheaper price. The OBSBOT Center allows you to choose from several different shooting modes and various framing. Let's have a look at what options each device has. The Tiny 2 has a lot more shooting modes than the Tiny 2 Lite. When it comes to body part tracking, both are able to do a close-up frame where the camera tracks you constantly, ensuring the subject is in a close-up frame no matter how far away from the camera it is. The Tiny 2 Lite definitely struggled with this one, and you can see the tracking go all over the place at certain points. The video also becomes severely overexposed at a certain point, which isn't ideal. Tiny 2, however, does it perfectly. Another option is an upper body focus frame, where both of the devices performed equally well, with the Tiny 2 Lite having a slightly tighter frame. The Tiny 2 is also able to do lower body framing and headless framing, which I'm not entirely sure why you'd want that, but we don't judge here at Versus, so you do you. Hand tracking is also possible on the Tiny 2, which may be useful to those of you who plan on perhaps demonstrating with your hands a lot. Other opportunities only available on the Tiny 2 are zone tracking, desk mode, which can be very useful if you would like to share some documents, do an unboxing, or perhaps perform a tutorial of some sort. Whiteboard mode is another feature that's unique to the Tiny 2, and what it essentially does is it zooms in and focuses on a whiteboard, therefore it's perfect for meetings or lectures in order for viewers to see information in detail without the need for you to adjust the camera manually. Both cameras also have AI auto tracking and auto framing and are able to track the subject while moving around, which can be very convenient depending on how active your sessions will be. There aren't major differences between the two, as both have very smooth and fast tracking. The only difference I can see is that the video quality is slightly more affected on the Tiny 2 Lite, as it tends to struggle with balancing the light at times, which in return makes the video have inconsistent exposure throughout. OBSBOT is known for its great gesture control capabilities when it comes to their devices. Let's take a closer look at what is possible on these two webcams. Both devices have Gesture Control 2.0, which includes the latest dynamic gesture control for managing simultaneous zoom in and out actions. To stop and start tracking, you simply just need to lift your hand up, palm facing the camera to initiate the action. If you place your hand in an L shape, the camera will detect it and zoom in closer. To zoom out, simply just do the same action. Another way to zoom in and out is by placing both hands by each side into L shapes and pulling the action back and then forward to zoom back out. But what's even more cool, and can be very handy, is voice control. However, this feature is only available on the Tiny 2. Let's give it a little test and show you what it can do. Track me. Zoom in closer. Zoom out further. Sleep, Tiny. Hi, Tiny. I personally really love this option and it works very well. It's fast, super smooth, and allows for easier control when you're perhaps not up close to your screen. All of these features can be easily controlled through the OBSBOT Center with just a few simple clicks. You also have the option of a beauty filter, which is definitely interesting. I suppose it's probably more popular in Asia, but I don't think I'd personally use it. Finally, let's take a closer look at the design of both devices and see if there are any major changes to the new Tiny 2 Lite. It's evident that the Tiny 2 is generally smaller and has a more premium feel. This is mainly due to its weight, which stands at 95.6 grams without the mount, and it has a very robust build. The Tiny 2 Lite, although bulkier, weighs less, standing at 91.4 grams with the built-in mount. It does feel a little more plastic in hand, but nevertheless it has a sleek design, and for its price point, it's understandable why it is how it is. However, what's really nice about the Tiny 2 Lite is that OBSBOT has now integrated the mount so that it is directly built into the device, whereas on the Tiny 2, you need a separate mount which you can then magnetically attach to the device. It's not the biggest issue, but it's great to see that they have taken this into account and improved on it. Finally, let's take a closer look at the price differences. The Tiny 2 is currently priced at $329 and it comes with a case and a mount included. The Tiny 2 Lite is currently priced at $179 and it doesn't come with a case, but it has an already built-in mount. So that pretty much sums up these two webcams. It's nice to see that although the Tiny 2 Lite is almost half the price of the Tiny 2, it's still been given care and attention to details such as having a convenient built-in mount. The video quality and autofocus are also pretty great on the Tiny 2 Lite, and apart from missing a few tracking features and not having the option for voice control, it's a pretty solid webcam. So unless you specifically need all of the cool extra features, then the Tiny 2 Lite would be a perfect option for you. But which one would you choose? Let us know in the comments down below. We really hope you enjoyed this review, and make sure to also subscribe to be a part of our Versus community if you aren't already. As always, give this video a big like if you enjoyed it, and make sure to check out the description for direct links to both of these devices. With that being said, we will see you in the next video, and until then, take care.